Hey there, I'm Joe Weems. Before we get into the video, I want to remind you about ng-conf 2023 happening in Salt Lake City, Utah on June 14th and 15th. Head over to ng-conf.org to check out the speakers, check out the talks, and to get your ticket before they all sell out. We'll see you there.
Excited to share with you about Angular PWAs. PWA stands for Progressive Web Application. This is a way that you can take your SPAs, your single-page applications, and make them mobile and responsive and kind of behave as if they were a native app, but they're really just web technology. So I'm really looking forward to that. If you have any questions as we were presenting today, that URL, it's going to be up there at the top. Please go there. You can ask questions. We're going to be monitoring questions up here. You're welcome to shout them out, but this might be a little bit easier with so many people. Just put them out there and we'll answer them as quickly as we can as we are going through. Anything else?
No, that's better.
All right.
Go for it.
Cool. So Maritine Dowden. Maritine is a UX, UI designer, application developer, and has written a number of books and is currently working on a book about CSS, tiny CSS projects. My name is Michael Dowden. I have been a software architect for quite a while and have been working with Angular, I guess, for 7 years now. So the first thing that we're going to do is we have a demo application, and we're going to start with an existing Angular application and add the progressive elements to it as we go through the day. We're going to show you how to turn that application into a PWA. We are going to also use Firebase in order to be able to deploy this and be able to add Firebase Cloud Messaging, which is a push notification system, so that you can be able to add that to your apps, which is a core component of a lot of different mobile applications. So really quickly, I'm going to do a quick demo of what that application is going to look like. Okay, so we have here a little chat application. It's pretty simple. Anybody can join it at this URL if you can see it, and then we can type to each other. Quick reminder, when you're typing in here or when you're typing in the questions, please remember the code of conduct. Let's all say nice things. So, and right now, it's just back and forth. We can all talk to each other. There's not a lot to it. We can actually have a search feature and everything. What we're going to do as we build this out, as many people want to join in here and type things, we can do that. Once we enable notifications, we're going to actually get push notifications. Everybody that subscribes to notifications is going to get that push notification. And we're going to go into that here in just a minute. But really, there's very little else to it. We have an authentication system so that I can log out and log back in. I'm being brave because this is a live demo and make sure everything works. Cool. And I'm back in. Very, very simple. Awesome. Thank you very much. And that is all there is to it. And now, Maritine is going to introduce you to the starting point.
So in order to enable the notifications and in order to publish our application, we're going to rely pretty heavily on Firebase. And so the first thing to getting set up with Firebase is the Firebase console. And so the Firebase console looks like kind of like this. You have the URL here at the bottom. In order to follow along with the code as we get started, you're going to need to go ahead and, with a Google account, log in to the Firebase console and go ahead and press that little plus button here to create a project. Ours right here is Fireside, and so you can name it whatever you want. That's not, that's whatever you want it to be. But that is going to set up all of those things that we're going to need to not only do push notifications, but also deploy it to an environment once we get to that point. The other piece that we're going to need to do is there'll be a slide recapping some of this so that you guys can follow along, but we're going to need to get this config. So this config right here is basically what's going to, laser doesn't show, never mind. This config right here is going to be what basically ties your application to your Firebase instance, right? That's how you're going to say, hey, my app, I want to be able to talk to Firebase. that's how it's going to be able to know which of the Firebase instances to go ahead, which is why it's blurred out, because I don't want you knowing about my instance, right? And so for that, once you go ahead and create the project, you're going to hit that little gear at the very top, and you're going to say Project Settings, and hit the config one. And the config one will give you a nice JavaScript object, which is a lot easier to contend with. And then the last piece we'll need to do is I'll go ahead and authorize and go ahead and set up authentication. Our application allows for email and Google. So you can go ahead and in authentication, go ahead and enable those. So you're going to want to do, oops. You're going to want to go ahead and in that build section, if it's not already showing for you, you're going to want to hit this build section. And it will show the authentication piece in order for you to be able to enable email and Google. Otherwise, you're not going to, once you go ahead and launch the application and have it set up with Google, with the Firebase instance, it's going to tell you authentication method unauthorized or not authorized yet, because that has not been enabled. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to go ahead and clone the repository. This is where you're going to be able to find all of the code for the application. Then what you're going to need to do is, again, go into the Firebase console and go ahead and create that project and enable Google authentication. And finally, get that config file we were just talking about and create a file under Angular source called firebaseconfig.json. And that's where you're going to go ahead and put that config file. Note that the config file, when you copy it out of the Firebase console, is in JavaScript, and this file is in JSON. So you will need to convert that JavaScript into JSON, right? Otherwise, you will get red squiggly lines all over the place, and we all love those, right? So we're going to give you guys 10 minutes to do that. If you have any questions, you can use the URL, or you can raise your hand frantically, and we will come help you get set up. Where do I set the Google authentication? Okay, so in the Firebase console, there's let me go back over here really quick. I'm going to mess everything up. It'll be great. When you go into if you hit this, I think it's under build, you should be, no, it's not under build. Actually, I lied. It's under the drop down. You'll see under the gear, you should have a authentication. Actually, I'll just open my console and we'll go from there.
It's under build.
You have it open already? There we go. So you go to the gear, you go to,
it's under build.
What?
It's under build.
It's under build? You go under build, mine is and then you'll have authentication. You hit authentication, and over here under sign-in methods, you hit there, and that's where you can enable.
You do have to have the project created first, so if you don't
Yes.
have a project created yet, you won't have any of this.
When creating the app in Firebase, do we need to check also set up Firebase hosting in this app? If you want to go ahead and host your app and go through the entire process of deploying it, which we will talk about at the end of this talk, yes, do go ahead and set up Firebase hosting for it. It will ask you if you want Google Analytics. We're not going to talk about that today, but you're welcome to set it up to see how that works if you want to. What type of project do we choose? We choose web as a project.
The live feed just came up. Did I miss something about a config? Yeah, I'm going to go through the config instructions one more time because it looks like some of the online folks may have missed it. So what you're going to do is to add, once you've cloned the repository, you're going to create a Firebase project in the Firebase console, which is at this URL. And then you're going to go enable Google authentication. So for the online folks, I'm going to run through that really quickly one more time. So once you've created a new Firebase project, in here you'll go under Build, Authentication, and you'll be able to go to Sign-in Method and enable Google. And you'll want that for this application. You can also enable email and password. In order to grab the configuration, you're going to go under this gear. You're going to go to Project Settings. And then you're going to come down. If you do not have an app yet, you're going to create a new app. You're going to choose a web application here. Once you've done that, it may prompt you for hosting, and you want to go ahead and enable hosting, probably. And then once this app isn't created, you can click on Config and copy this to get your config information. Once you've done that, you're going to create a file here in this path in the project under Angular SRC, and you're going to create a firebase.config.json file, and that is where all your Firebase config lives. Note that is a JSON file, so when you copy the config, it has a variable assignment at the front. Get rid of that so that it's just a pure JSON object. And if you want to see the demo application, that is the URL for the demo application.
Has anybody been able to successfully clone? Because I'm getting questions about permission. Somebody telling me they were getting a permissions denied. So I just want to make sure it's not on our end.
Really? Okay.
Okay.
Can you do the Firebase again, but half speed?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You want to look up the GitHub URL and see
The GitHub URL?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to come back out to the front of this. I've got a whole bunch of projects here. To get started in Firebase from console.firebase.google.com, you're going to click Add Project. Give it any name. You can call it ng-conf 2022 if you want. And then you're going to continue to create that project. And actually, let's go ahead and, I'm not going to use this one, but I can go ahead and create it for you to be able to see it. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to turn off Google Analytics, just because it's going to create it faster to not do that. Okay, there's my new project ready. It's going to take me right inside of the brand new project. Now that I'm in the project, I'm going to go into the Build menu and go to Authentication. It's going to prompt me to get started. And it's going to give me a list of providers. I'm going to click on email password and set enable, and save. I'm going to add another provider. I'm going to add the Google provider and enable. And you have to choose a project support email. It doesn't want you to leave that empty. It'll just be your Google login email. And then save. This gets me through the authentication configuration. The last step I have to do is under the gear. Go to project settings. There are no apps in your project, so I'm going to click on web, which is the open bracket, close bracket. And I'm going to check the box for also enable Firebase hosting. If you don't do that, it's okay. You just won't be able to easily host it later. And then register app.
All right. I have updated the link for the HTTPS link in the slide. So if you want to look at that, if you want to put that up. That was my bad. I'm used to the SSH version, which obviously can't be done if you don't have access to the account.
Okay. I'll finish doing the demo, then I'll pull that back up again. So once we have added Firebase to the web app, it's done the registration. Here's the SDK. We're just going to hit next. Next. We don't need to do any of these things for right now, because we're going to go through that later. Continue to console. Once it's added the app, I can scroll down here, click on config, copy the configuration, and then I'm going to open up my project, and I'm going to go to Angular, SRC, and this is where you're going to create that new file. I already have the file here. It's Firebase config.json. And this is what it should look like when you're done. You will paste your configuration in here, and then you will remove this part so that it looks like that. Here is the git clone URL again.
We're going to need to move on here soon.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. I'm going to give a few more minutes because I think that we're.
I think an internet is seemingly to be seemingly quite difficult on everybody. Yeah.
We will demo every piece of this as we go through. So if you are having trouble following along, we will go through every single step from this point forward.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to see exactly how it works.
Clone failed. What was the fix? The fix was try this other URL instead of the @git URL that was originally up there.
Can I get a quick show of hands, everybody that's been able to successfully grab the repo? Okay, so there are quite a few people that have gotten it. Okay,
sweet.
Most of the room, in fact. Good.
Okay, good.
Happy to hear that.
Yep.
We tried to keep the repo small so because of the Wi-Fi situation. We were
Yep.
anticipating that. Okay. I'm going to let's give 2 minutes and then we'll move on to the next step.
Yep.
Back on the Firebase, did you have to add 2 authentications?
Yes, web, email and password, which is the first one, and Google, which is the second one.
Those are the 2 authentication modes we have enabled by default in the demo application. Theoretically, once you've gotten all this done and you run npm start, it should show up and you should have the chat app running in your system.
Yes. Yes. Sweet.
Awesome.
Did our link disappeared? Our question link disappeared.
The what?
The question link disappeared.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know why.
Oh, it's because I had to relaunch the, 1 second.
Okay. Cool.
There we go.
That's the question link. That's the chat link. Sweet. We got
Sorry, I didn't mean to take the chat link down for you. What are the contents of the Firebase config JSON? What is the structure? Yes, okay. Go through that. So inside of the code editor here, you have Angular src folder. And inside of that folder, we're going to create this firebase.config.json. And then when we paste in the config that we just got, there's a couple things we're going to have to do. The first one is get rid of the variable assignment, then get rid of the semicolon, and then each of these needs to be a string to be valid JSON. So once we've done this, you should have these values: API key, auth domain, project ID, storage bucket, message sender ID, and app ID.
And that information is what links you back to, that's what basically Firebase is using. It's all your API keys, it's all your secrets, it's all of that fun stuff.
Okay.
So.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take the chat link down for you. What are the contents of the Firebase config JSON? What is the structure? Yes, okay.
What are the contents of the Firebase config JSON? What is the structure? Yes.
Okay.
to be able to run all those things.
Okay. All right, I think we're good to move forward.
All right. Okay, so progressive web apps. Basically, there's 3 pillars in progressive web apps, that they're capable, and with that, today, if we think about even just a couple years ago, the number of APIs that were available to us with PWAs was significantly less than what we have today, right? So a lot of the questions I get when we're talking to clients about, why would we do a PWA, and versus why would I want to do a native web app, right? The question is always, can I get the same functionality that I would get with a native web app? And the answer is close. There's definitely still some gaps, but every year we get more and more capabilities directly with our devices that we would have had to use a native web app before. Reliable, that means that, hey, it's going to work, and it's this web app that we're working on today has not been enabled for offline because it's a chat, right? Like chat offline is kind of a misnomer. But the fact that it will work work well, and that has offline capabilities if that's appropriate. And then installable, that's the big key, right? Because that had been the difference between a website and an application, is that websites, you can't have that nifty little icon on your home screen where you can just click on it like an app, although now we can do, shortcuts to home screen and stuff. But so can it be installed very similarly to what you would do with a native application? And so we are going to do the install prompt today in this workshop. The thing with installability is it's still got a handful of issues with iOS, and we'll talk about that as well when we get to that. However, those are kind of the three pillars of PWA, and the big benefit when talking to clients that always comes up is you write it once and it will work on all of the platforms, right? Again, caveat on iOS because they still have their little intricacies, but they're getting there. They're definitely a lot more opportunities and a lot more work. They work a lot better than they used to. So what goes into making a PWA? We have a web manifest. The web manifest kind of defines all of the pieces that you would see in an application. That's where you're going to be defining your icon. You know that nifty little icon that shows up when you click on the screen and it pops up and it has a nice little load screen? It's got those icons. It's also going to determine where the entry point to the application is. There's a base URL. There's the color, so that when you're viewing it on the screen, you've got the color bar at the top, and a number of other things related to what makes that an application and the display of it once it launches in the person's device. It needs to serve on HTTPS. That's one of the things. Now, when we do the serve, you will notice that it runs on HTTP. It'll work anyway, so don't worry about that. And then the icon to represent the app device, we've kind of talked about that, and then it needs to register a service worker. Now, the cool thing about all of this is that Angular does a lot of this work for us. And so one of the things we're going to be that we can do with Angular is do ng-add Angular PWA. Now, if you don't get ahead of yourselves, if you're going to do that, add an @13 at the end. If you're preemptively working while I'm talking, don't forget the @13, because this is an Angular 13. And so if you have the latest and greatest CLI and you try to install 14, it'll die. So go ahead and, so by adding Angular PWA, what does it do? Well, it adds that service worker we were just talking about right out of the gate for us, and enables the service worker on the build. It updates our index.html with a manifest and a theme color. The theme color is going to determine that when the application loads and you have that top bar, that color, that's what it's going to determine. It's going to install some icon files, and it's going to create an ngsconfig.json. So that ngswconfig.json, what it does is it's going to go ahead and define things like how you want your application to be cached. So when it installs in the background, and part of where the magic happens with the being able to work offline, being able to load faster, and so on and so forth, is that caching, which it could be an entire presentation in and of itself. We're not going to go into that. We're going to go into the installability and notifications today. But that is where you're going to find all the information on how your application is going to cache stuff in the background. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and add Angular PWA. So what you're going to want to do is, you may have noticed that the structure of the project has a Angular folder. You're going to go ahead and get into that Angular folder. Go ahead and add Angular/PWA at 13. Don't forget the at 13. And then go back up a level and just run npm run serve. What that will do is that will go ahead and launch the application that will go ahead and build, and it will serve it up on Firebase. And that will give you, we are going to be able to see the PWA at work at that point. Go ahead and do that. We will give you 5 minutes. Let us know if you have any questions or any issues.
Yes, it is possible to install PWAs on iPhone.
Yes.
Definitely.
It's a slightly different process, which we will talk about when we talk about the prompt to install.
Yes, Node version 14, more recent version should work theoretically. Okay, 14.2.0. Okay. So yeah, Node 14 is what we're typically on. Node 16 should theoretically work. Oh, it didn't work. Good times, so 14 only. And this is one of the real joys when dealing with all the CLI tools that are Node related, right? Like, there's theoretically newer versions should work and be backwards compatible, but that is not always the case. One of the things for this particular project as well is we have the Angular version, which we're working on Angular 13 still, the LTE. There were some version compatibility issues with Angular 14 on some of the libraries we're using. You have Firebase, you have Angular Fire, you have the UI component. So there's a lot of different pieces all the versions have to match. And so in this project they do. But that prevents us from being on the absolute bleeding edge of every single thing sometimes.
What exact version of Node are you running?
Go ahead. It's your computer.
1420. Oh, is the Q&A down for anybody? Oh, that's weird. Okay, hold on.
I got hung up on the npm install, but I couldn't ask a
Oh,
question.
it's
See, it's still running. I did the npm run setup earlier, and it just like.
Oh, that's the internet. There's nothing I can do about that. You're fine. That's the internet.
Okay.
Is it back up? I don't know. Can somebody do a test question just to see if it's back up?
Nope,
It shouldn't be closed.
It just totally went away. I have a sneaking suspicion that this might be a Wi-Fi issue. All right. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to restart. I'm going to create a new
I was going to say, do you want to create a new instance?
new instance. All right, new URL. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, so there's a few steps to go through the add Angular, PWA. How are we looking out there? Show of hands. Nobody yet? Okay. Are you having trouble running the, so I've got a few people.
Unable to ask questions due to restrictions
You didn't, it's still set on our local domain, on the domain. You need to change it to everyone up here. There you go.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Ah, sorry about that.
Is this the session?
Yep, need to reload the. Got it. Gotcha. Thank you very much. We have questions back up.
Sweet.
So are you having trouble with the install steps? Oh.
Oh, great.
So you're back here still? Okay. Let's create a link to the slides.
Let's just keep going.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're never going to get through content.
Give me a second.
All right, we're going to keep going, Wi-Fi being Wi-Fi, because at this point, otherwise we'll never get through content. And unless y'all want an entire workshop on npm install, we're going to have to get going. So, so what happens when we go ahead and npm install is we get this beautiful output. In your command line, when, Wi-Fi, no, that's when you do the add Angular PWA, sorry. When Wi-Fi actually acquiesces and lets us download the entire internet, we get the following. And so what you will see is it goes ahead and updates our project with the icon sets. It updates our Angular.json because when it creates the manifest, we want to make sure that that manifest gets published. So it updates the Angular.json to add that link. Obviously, the package.json gets updated because we're installing stuff. And then we have our source.index is updated to include links to some of the new stuff, including the manifest. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like underneath the hood. Obviously, we will try it live, and if internet does not acquiesce, we will give up. So we get a command line. We're going to do cd Angular, and we are going to npm install ng add Angular PWA at 13. And go ahead and run that puppy. While that is running, and we will take a look at that, we're going to go back to slides and do it this way. What we will find is that when we go ahead and run, so these are a handful of tools you will see in your Chrome DevTools that are going to be super helpful for debugging your PWAs. So the first one is if we go in the Chrome DevTools and we go to Application, we will see that there is a thing that in the sidebar, it says manifest. And that will actually give you an output of the manifest that will create it. You will also know that it throws a slew of warnings at the top. And that is related to our icons. So and it throws a couple more down the line. First, then it goes ahead and we see that our theme color is blue. I don't know if you've noticed the application, but there's very little blue in the application. So we're going to want to go ahead and change that. And then lastly, it shows that the icons that are being added for our PWA are the big Angular icon. Like, I love Angular as much as anybody else, but I would rather my app icon be there rather than the Angular icon. So in the project, I have a folder with all the icons there for you. But what happens with those icons is, and the reason we get that warning about any maskable is because there's kind of two ways to add our icons to those PWAs. We all know that different devices kind of display those icons a little bit differently, right? They might be rounded, they might have a square around it, whatever. And so maskable means that they can go ahead, that the application can, or the OS can go ahead and reshape that icon. So there's kind of a safe zone there that's being needed. In other words, we need to make sure that our icon has enough padding inside of it in order for when that shaping to happen to match the OS, it does not cut off our icon in ways that are unsightly. And so that's why it's not recommended to do the maskable any, because we're basically telling the system, hey, you can use this icon in any way you want, in any way, shape, or form. If you've thoroughly tested it, yeah, can it work? Sure. But that's why we get that warning. Now, I have created the icon with enough padding so that we can go ahead and do the maskable any, even though it tells us it's not a good idea, but in order to make it easiest for us today. So we will see that in our project, under Assets, there is an app icon folder. And the reason I didn't just put it under Icons, which is where we kind of want it, is because otherwise, if I had preemptively done that and you do the ng-add PWA, it will throw an error and says, I already have icons here. They're named the same. I don't know what to do, and it's going to stop. So I went ahead and named it differently, so we will need to update the manifest to either have the new path or to copy and paste those icons into the icon folder. Either way you look at it, it is going to work, but that way it has our little flames at the top instead of the Angular A as our icons. The other piece we'll want to do is that theme color, that's where that blue is coming from. We're going to go ahead and update it to an orange. So let me see really quick if our npm install works so that I can show you all the dev tools. So give everybody a little bit longer for that install to go through. My install did go through, so let's go ahead and run it.
I did share the Google Slides link, so it should be there inside the chat for those who want to be able to look the slides up.
It's running, it's running. Okay, this is taking, yep, all right. Let's go to the project. Gonna go over here, we're gonna go to localhost. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? All right.
Almost.
Almost. Not quite. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at those dev tools. And I had that open already somewhere. Nope. I had those open. Nope. There we go. All right. So we can see no manifest detected. Awesome. Why is no manifest detected? We're going to close those and try again. Inspect. So that's where we're going to go under Application. I did the ng-add. Why is it? It's not working. Did the build not happen?
It did. Where's it in here?
No, that's Angular.
Where's the manifest?
Hmm?
Where's the manifest file?
There's no manifest. Did the add not work?
Yeah, it looks like the ad didn't work.
Okay, so our add didn't work. That's brilliant. Okay, so we're having internet issues as well. Yay. Yay for live code and live demos, right? So let's keep going then. See if you have better luck than I do with the ng-add. Did anybody actually manage to do that ng-add? Sweet.
Handful of people. Good.
Okay, cool. So go ahead and update those links. Go ahead and update those colors. And that should update your manifest to be what you want it to look like. And while y'all are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and try to figure out why ours did not. Right? That's the link.
Yep, that's right.
That's you. Haha, success. If you're getting the error add Angular dev kit build Angular browser, make sure you added the add 13 when you did the install for the PWA.
Otherwise, it'll default to whatever your current Angular CLI is, which is probably 14. Or maybe you have an older version and it defaults to 12. None of those will work correctly as you would like. Okay, you're good.
Okay, so now I can show the DevTools. Okay, so with that, did you serve it? Or
I did
is
not serve it.
Okay. So the reason I'm building and I'm doing a Firebase serve instead of running it on localhost 4200 and so that we can get the full serve and that a lot of the service worker work better that way. That's the reality. Which takes a little bit longer to build. Although at this point, since I'm just doing the manifest, I can probably just do ng-served. Go a little bit faster. Oh, but then I'm on localhost. Okay. After you open the new localhost. There we go. Okay. So now, with that added, we can see that application. We can see the manifest. There we go. And we can also see all of the icons that I was talking about. So that's why we need to update it to be our own. So let's go ahead and run that update. So to update those, we're going to go in here. We're going to go into the manifest. Which was added by our add PWA. And here, instead of icons, I'm going to search for all of these. Control find. And we're going to do app icons. There we go. Nope. There we go. And save that. And then we're going to, hey, I said all of them. There we go. And then we're going to change that color, that theme color, to, what did I say I wanted it to be? We'll just call it orange. It's okay. FFD 160. There we go, thank you. All right, and so now when I refresh, it should just auto refresh. We can inspect, again, look at those and look at our application. And now we have our new icons that are showing up, which we like, and our new color, which matches our icon, which we like. All right. Where's the slides? There's the slides. All right. So I mentioned earlier that there was that maskable error, right? So if we look at our icons, this little square in our DevTools up here, which is right here, if I click over here, it says show minimum safe area for maskable icons. We can see that my icons are not getting chewed up, that nothing's getting cut off. That's where that maskable warning is. If you click that button and your icons look fine, you can kind of ignore that warning. But that tells you that you've got enough padding. If my icon was closer to the edges and didn't have as much padding from the edge of its file, what would happen is you'd see a nice little circle around it, and it would, get pieces chopped off. Which in this particular icon, not as much an issue, but if you have, say, a nice little, maybe you've got your mascot as your icon and you chop its head off, maybe not ideal. So you gotta be careful with those. So back to our presentation. Where's the slides? I lost the slides. There we go. All right. So there's a little tool I like to use when we're dealing with maskable icon, and it's called maskable.app, really hard to remember. And what it does is it allows me to go ahead and upload I work in SVG, so it allows me to upload my icon SVG, and it goes ahead, there's a number of tools that you can use to look at what it's gonna look like, and it'll spit out maskable icons for you. So it allows to do all of your resizing for PWAs, it's real convenient. There's other tools out there. This is one of the ones that I found was pretty easy to use. It also have, if you want to get into monochrome icons, because there are certain applications for wanting monochrome, you can go ahead, there's a tab for monochrome, and it goes ahead and spits all of that out for you, which is really nice. So that's one of the kind of helper tools that I like to use in order to make my life easier. All right. The other piece that we will notice is that after running the ng-add Angular.pwa, we now have a service worker. There's magic. It's just there. It just works. It just runs, assuming the internet, is nice to us for once. Let's go ahead and see if it went ahead and worked. No promises on that count, but we'll give it one try and see if it works. So the way we find the service worker is, again, under application. We can look for service worker, and oh, that's 4200. That's why. And that's when we get into that whole 4200 issue not working. So I'm going to have to run it a slightly different way. That's where running the built version is going to be necessary. So I'm going to do npm run build. Actually, I'm going to go up a level.
To get a question about enabling Firestore, and the answer is, in order to be able to actually type in the chat, I think, yes, you'll have to enable Firestore through the console.
Build. Okay, while it's building, and I will show you this slide once it's done building, the way you can tell that things are working is basically you will see that in your DevTools you'll have kind of this view, and it'll show you your It'll show you your service workers. The other thing that when you're debugging service workers and when you're debugging an application with service workers, you'll notice this update on reload checkbox at the very top of the page. That checkbox is your friend, because what will happen is that if that is on and your dev tools are open, when you reload the page, if there is, and you reload your application, it will go ahead and reset your service workers. So if you're doing like live updates or something like that, and you want to make sure you're getting your latest and changes and that your cache is not being problematic, check that little blue checkbox, keep your dev tools open, and that will go a long way into resetting those service workers. Let's see, how are we on the build? We built Firebase. Serve. So while that's going, next. The other thing we can do to check on the health of our PWA is to go ahead and run Lighthouse. How many of you are familiar with Lighthouse? Yay! So Lighthouse in there has in your DevTools in Chrome, what you will see is that, I'm going to go ahead and pull those up now. In your DevTools, Nope. Somewhere in here. There we go. Inspect. You will see that there is a little lighthouse. It should be there. If it's not, click that little arrow and you'll find it eventually. And you will see we only want the one we're going to be working on today and that we care about today. We're going to click the mobile one and we're going to click progressive web app. You're welcome to run all of it. However, it is a little slow, especially on warm-up, and being with our internet issues, you may want to, just run the bare minimum, and then go ahead and analyze page load. Let me make sure the actual page actually loaded before I run that. That would be good. There we go. Cool. And so we're going to go ahead and analyze that page load. And what we will notice once we analyze that page load is we do have one more error that Angular does not do for us. So Angular does a lot when it does that PWA setup. However, it will not set up our Apple icon. So we're starting with that whole, what do we need to do in order to make iOS play nice with us? And that is going to be one of them. We're going to need to add an icon specific to iOS. Now, the thing about that icon that is specific to iOS is unlike our other icons in our config, right, that all had a transparent background, the iOS icon will have to have an opaque background, so you will need some kind of background color. And you will notice in the file, in the folder with all of our icons, you will see there's an Apple Touch icon. Specifically, in that folder, that's the one we're going to want to go ahead and set up. That's finishing up. Come on, come on. Oh, that's just rude. It just kind of stalled there. Okay. Come on. All right, moving on. Oh, maybe? Did it find? Okay. So what you will see is that everything's fine. We have a web manifest. We have a start URL. We've got a configured splash screen. So most of this was done automatically by doing that add PWA, right? But it says it does not have a valid Apple Touch icon. And that is the icon I was just talking about. That is for the splash screen on iOS. So what we're going to want to do is go ahead and add that. There's basically two pieces of information you need for that icon. Is one, it needs to either be a 180 by 180 or a 192 by 192, and the background cannot be transparent. That's pretty much it. After that, the icon can be whatever. So we will want to add this link rel Apple Touch icon href to our icon in the index.html inside of our application. And that will get us to where we get our green little check mark in the Lighthouse checker for PWA. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And then we're going to start talking about prompting for download. Actually, where's my code? There's my code. There we go. go to index.html. Where's my slide? I lost my slide. There you go. So it's going to be link rel Apple touch icon href, and that's going to be can't find my assets. There we go. And that will give us our Apple Touch icon and kind of finish that setup. Now the last piece we need to do for kind of that PWA experience is the download, right? We've had a number of questions regarding downloading, especially on iOS. So let's take a look at that. So kind of the expected behavior is that we are going to be able to have that prompt up at the bottom that says add to home screen, right? That's kind of, or install my application, or whatever you want that text to say. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to bank on a JavaScript event called before install prompt. And what that will do is if you are in Android, if you are already installed, this will be fine and it will do nothing. But if you don't have the application installed, it will go ahead and prompt for the install. So let's go ahead and look at that code. Basically, what we're going to do is, because of iOS, we're going to want to differentiate between what is Android and what is iOS. One of the things we can do is we have material loaded. One of the SDKs that comes with Angular materials, import platform module from Angular CDK platform. And what that will do is it will tell us, is this Android or is this iOS? It will tell us a lot of things as well, like Edge, Blink, WebKit, Trident, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it will specifically, the one we care about today is the fact that it tells us that platform.android or platform.iOS. So we're going to be able to create two different paths for how to install our application, one for Android, one for iOS. And that is how we're going to handle that situation. So what we're going to do, if you look in your code, you will see that you have apwa.service.ts. That has been commented out. You can go ahead and uncomment that, and you will see the code that is here. Basically, what happens is we are going to take that event. We're going to prevent, if we're in Android, we're simply going to prevent default, and I'm going to call my component, which I created, which is a prompt component. It's just a slider at the bottom of the page with some text in it, right? It's nothing fancy. But that goes ahead and prompts the user to go ahead and install the application if it's not already installed on their device. For iOS, on the other hand, there's no automatic way to do that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to check that they are actually in standalone. So in that mode, that standalone mode. Because if they are, that means they've already installed the application. We don't want to prompt them again while they're already in that PWA mode. So we're basically going to check, are you in standalone? And if you're not, I'm going to prompt. The downside to that experience is that because we have no indication of whether or not it's installed on the device, regardless of whether they have that installed on their device, it's going to prompt them. Android, even if you do hit the web version, if they already have it installed, it's not going to prompt for the install, which is nice because we don't want to be constantly throwing that in the user's face. With iOS, we don't have that luxury, so this is the best we've got. At that point, what happens is, notice that I have a 3,000 millisecond or 3-second delay there on what happens for the prompt. And that's because of our service worker. If we open our service worker information, I'm just going to look for 3,000. That'll make it super easy. We will notice that in our app module, when Angular set up our service worker for us, and it goes to register that service worker, it's basically going to happen for as soon as the application loads or within 30 seconds. So what I want to do is I want to wait for that prompt until I know that service worker has loaded, because the installing of the application won't work until the service worker works. So I want to make sure that those are in sync, which is why I just, instead of waiting for an application load or anything like that, I just wait the 30 seconds and call it a day. So that's where you get why you get that timer on there. And so at that point, I can prompt. And so what happens with that prompt is because I'm passing in over here, I'm passing in to my function, my open prompt, whether you're iOS or whether you're Android. At that point, I can give two different experiences. The one with the black phone has the add to home screen. That's for Android. It's your typical experience. And for iOS, well, there's not an auto install, but we can tell the user how they can install the PWA. And so that's how that can happen. You go under the menu and you say add to home screen, and it will install the PWA at that point. But the user has to do that manually. And so what you can do at that point is, I just put it in text, but you can do icons to show exactly which buttons to push, whatever the case might be. But at that point, you can create separate prompts and separate users to go down those two different tracks to make sure that your users know that it's a possibility to do that on iOS. And so that's how we go ahead and do those two. And you have the dismiss in order for a simple, like, just close the thing. If they already, for iOS, if they already have it installed, or if they just don't want to deal with that right now. And so that is how you're going to get those two prompts to work. So in order to get that to work on your system, go ahead and uncomment that service. I'm going to do that now. And then what you're going to be able to see that in the DevTools, if you set the phone, if you click the phone, the DevTools, and it goes ahead and shows them like so, in other words. The DevTools are smart enough, once you're running, that if you pick iPhone and you refresh, now I haven't uncommented the service or anything, but if you click the iPhone and refresh, it'll go ahead and throw the prompt normally. And then if you click for iPhone, and if you click, I don't know, something not iPhone related, let's pick a Pixel, it will go ahead and throw the Android prompt. So it is smart enough in the DevTools to go ahead and show those two different prompts based on the devices that you pick at the top. If you do not see the devices you want, you can always add more devices by hitting that edit button and clicking whatever devices you want to try it on, which is super cool. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go into our PWA service. We are going to uncomment. I guess it's already uncommented. That's interesting. Why is it already uncommented? Okay. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. And as you can see, when I refreshed, it went ahead and showed me the add to home screen prompt. If I pick, I just had to hard refresh. If I pick the iPhone and I hard refresh, it's going to go ahead and wait that 30 seconds and give me my iPhone prompt. And so you can see that working. And so you can easily debug your prompt without having to load an iPhone, like having to load everything on an actual phone. Word of caution, though, these emulators, they work great up to a point. It does not substitute for honest-to-goodness device testing. There are going to be intricacies that aren't going to show up on these emulators. So do actually test on device. But for quick and dirty checking, this works pretty well. Has anybody been able to actually see this on their device? Yes. All right. How are we on time? We need to get moving. All right. Customizing styles. Now, you may have noticed that the web version and the version when you get to that emulation on the phone screen doesn't quite look the same. And when we're dealing with PWA, kind of the point is to make it look like an app, right? So there's a couple different ways that we can make that happen. The thing to remember is if you're dealing with CSS, there is no media query of if iOS do this, if Android do this. It's not that cool. It'd be awesome if it did, but there isn't. The things we can, however, create media queries on are, is it full screen, standalone, minimal UI, or browser? Those can be a starting point for your CSS in order to customize what you're going to show. The other way is either through Window Navigator Agent in your JavaScript or TypeScript, or that platform module, which is that same one that we just used in order to differentiate our service worker. You can use that in order to maybe set a class on body in order to say, hey, I'm iOS versus I'm Android, to be able to do some custom styling based on one versus the other. Say if you wanted to differentiate icons, for example, very similar to how you would do a light and dark theme type situation. You could go ahead and have that to set classes on your application. We don't have enough time in this particular workshop to go through the ins and outs of how to build that CSS, but that's kind of the foundational pieces. But just remember, at Media Query iOS is not going to work, unfortunately, or at Media Query Android is not a thing. That's you at this point. So at this point, I'm going to bring it over to Michael to kind of talk about some more about emulating, hosting, and deploying.
All right, there we go. So we've kind of glossed over some of this a little bit, but really quickly, there are 3 different ways to run this application because we are in Firebase world. And the first one is to run a local server. Obviously, you can run Angular using ng-serve, and that will work to a point, but some of the stuff we want to be able to test doesn't work that way. So one option is to run a local Firebase server. So the Firebase command line tools, which you get by globally installing npm install-g firebase-tools, which I had posted in the Q&A earlier, will globally install the Firebase CLI, and that will allow you to type this. It is also built into the npm scripts we created, which should theoretically use the Firebase install inside of your project.
Kind of a note for running Firebase, you will need to have Firebase tools installed. So if you've never used Firebase and do not have Firebase tools installed, you will need to add those, which is npm install-g Firebase tools. But you will need Firebase tools installed.
So when you're running a local server, first thing you have to do is run a build, right? You have to build your Angular project because you're essentially serving it the same way you would in a normal production environment. You're just doing it locally. And when you run Firebase serve, it's using the Firebase hosting configuration with all of that entails, and it's doing it on your local system. The downsides here are that it does not support live reloading. So every time you make a change, you're going to have to rebuild and reserve the application, which is, of course, a little bit annoying. But it does use, and it uses the live deployed services on the Firebase account. And in order to use this to test all of the additional Firebase services, especially for Firebase Cloud Messaging, which we're about to do, it would require a credit card in order to test the services because they do not have a free tier for messaging or cloud functions. The other option, and this is how I've set up this demo to work, is to use the emulator. This creates a localized version on your laptop of each of the configured Firebase services that we're going to need in order to test how things work. This means you don't have to use a credit card because you're just running everything on your machine. You're not running in the cloud. It's not a perfect representation of everything that's going on, but it is good enough to really be able to test out, is my database working, is my auth working, all these different things. It does, however, work best with a stable internet connection. So we may or may not run into problems with this. I did run into some issues working on the Wi-Fi earlier. In this case, because we have the package.json set up with npm scripts, npm run serve will do all the builds and run all the emulators locally. That should theoretically work. You may, as some people have noted, run into missing Java. One of the emulators does require Java. Sometimes it will install everything you need when you run npm install. Others, you have to have Java installed separately. The other thing that we can do is just build and deploy into the cloud and then do the testing. This is a perfect example because now we're running in the real environment. It is a lot slower though because deploy takes a lot longer than spinning up an emulator or running the local server. And again, you're in a situation where you need a credit card to test the services. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be running the emulator locally to show how everything works. We are emulating Firestore, so we're going to have a clean database when I run this locally. I am emulating storage, because technically the chat application has the ability to upload images, and then I'm emulating hosting. I am not emulating auth. I'm running the real live auth.
Functions.
And I am emulating functions as well locally on the system. So what I'm going to show you how to do is set up push notifications. And I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly because there's a lot of different pieces to setting up Firebase Cloud Messaging. So I am going to show how to do all the code and show you what all the different pieces of code means. The how-to guides that you find online for doing this are great, except there's just lots of missing. There's lots of "and magic happens here" types of things going on in a lot of the documentation, which is why I really want to show this to you. And a lot of times you're going to implement push notifications along with your PWAs. So what is Firebase Cloud Messaging? It's essentially a push notification system. It allows you to send notifications based upon events that happen within the application. You're also able to, using this, go into the Firebase Cloud Console and push notifications out to all the users manually. If you were ever to need to do that for some reason, you can actually do that as well. There's a few different options that you have here, but you're going to be able to target a single device, a group of devices, or devices that have subscribed to a specific topic. And you're going to be able to send messages from your client applications, from your server-side applications, and from the console, as we mentioned. Really quickly, I'm going to actually show you what that console looks like. So when you come in here, it's under, not under there, it is under release. Nope, it is under engage. So there's these different categories of things in Firebase. Build is the stuff for getting your apps built. Release and monitor is like your analytics things. And then engage is ways to really work with your users once things are open. And so you've got this messaging tab here. And this is where cloud messaging shows up. Hold on. Yep. And oh, I need to switch to my project. That's why. There we go. Like, why is that not showing up? Okay. This is the project that we were actually set up on. So now I have messaging set up. So I can, for example, come in here and create a new notification. And this is the UI you will use to manually send notifications. I'm going to do this in a minute once we have everything set up to show you how that works. So there's different pieces to setting up notifications. The first thing is we need the ability for the users to subscribe their device and say, hey, I would like to be able to receive notifications, please. This can get really complex. What we're doing here is very simple. They're simply subscribing their device. There's only one topic, and it is that they want to be notified when new chats show up in the chat application. You can make this really complicated where they subscribe their device and also subscribe, for example, to a list of topics or a list of different types of notifications you want to give them. You can make it really complex. The other thing we're going to have to do is be able to show the notifications in the app when the app is running. So if they currently have the chat application open, we might want different behavior than when the chat application is closed. And so we've got to actually write the code to handle that. The other thing we need to do is show notifications on the device when the app is not loaded. Because the whole point of a push notification, right, is they're not running our app right now, but we want to get them a message. And we can totally do that, and we're going to show the code to do that as well. And then finally, we have to write the code to actually push the notifications out. We want to send the notifications when an event happens. In our case, the event that happens is somebody typed a chat message, and the response is that we're going to send the notification out to everybody that has subscribed to receive those. So the first thing we're going to have to do is add Angular Fire messaging module. We're using the Angular Fire SDK because we are in Angular, and this makes it really easy to add different Firebase services. We're going to have to enable the messaging API in the cloud. So in this particular case, this URL will get customized with your project ID from Firebase. It should prompt you to do this in your console. when we come into functions, eventually it's going to run functions, and it will prompt you for it inside of the notify once we get there. So that you don't have to just, whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. So you don't have to memorize this URL. But here's the URL, and you're going to show up here, and you're going to have to enable, you're going to click a button that says Enable API. If you don't do that, it's not going to actually send the messages. Every piece of this will work, but you're like, why am I not getting any messages? And because you have to set up that API. That is not really well covered in documentation, so that's the reason I'm bringing it up here. You're going to choose a different mechanism for subscriptions. Again, you can either pick, I want to send to a list of device IDs, or I want to push to a topic, and everybody that is subscribed to that topic. The easiest way to do this is to have a list of topics. Absolutely, hands down. The only time that I really push to a list of devices is when a user is doing something to their account that I want to notify them about, or something account related. Anytime you're doing something that's like system-wide, like somebody typed the chat, I don't want to have to go fetch the list of every single user that's subscribed to notifications every single time I have to send that message. That will get really, really expensive. The other thing we have to do is we have to store those device tokens. So once they've said, hey, I would like to subscribe to notifications, please, that enables the permission in the browser, and it gives us a token, but we have to do something with that token. The thing that we're going to do with that token is record it in the database along with our user record. Now, again, I'm doing this very simply. I'm only essentially allowing a single device per user because I'm storing that thing right on the user. In all of the production applications that we have a collection of multiple device IDs so that every user could potentially register multiple different devices, because in the real world, nobody uses just one device at a time for a lot of their different devices. Because this is a PWA, somebody may very well have a phone and a tablet and a laptop all using your service at different points of time. That's one of the benefits of a PWA, but that also makes it harder because it's not just on one app or on one device for us to be able to deal with. So I'm just going to pop the code open for this. What we're essentially doing here is allowing the user to subscribe. And there's two key functions that we have to deal with. The first is the Firebase messaging. We're going to request a token. When we request a token, Firebase is going to say, hey, do I have permission in this device right now? No, I'm going to prompt the user and get that permission so that I can give you that device token. And then I'm going to store it in the database. And we're going to do the same thing kind of in reverse when we remove permission. So we're doing this inside of the chat room itself. In fact, in the HTML for the chat room, we have created two buttons. We're hiding and displaying them based upon whether or not we currently have a notification token already recorded for that user. And there's an enable notifications button, which calls that function, and a disable notifications function, which calls that function. And what they do is, so this.fcm, I'll scroll up to the top here really quickly. In the constructor, I have called FCM Angular Fire messaging. So I'm just importing this service that comes right out of Angular Fire. And I'm saying, hey, Firebase Cloud Messaging, I want to request the token. When I get it, it's only going to happen once. I want to make sure that my subscribe doesn't hang around. And then once I get it, I'm going to record it to the database. And this is a quick update. Regardless of what else is in the user object, I'm going to add that notification token into that location. That way, it's going to show up in the database. And I can come out here and show you where that exists. Here. So there's some really cool tools in here. So for example, I'm going to look up my ID. I'm going to grab my ID. I'm going to come into the Firestore database and find myself. Cool. And you'll see that I have no notification token right now, but this is where that's going to get recorded right there in the database. The next thing is when they disable, what we're going to do is look up the token, because I need to know that I have access to that, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that token, because I need to grab the token in order to request a deletion. That essentially removes the permission from the browser. We have to go ahead and get that again in the future, and then we go ahead and remove their token from the database. Once we have done that, we can run the server, and I can show you how that works. What I'm going to do instead, actually, because we are a little short on time, here is once again, that URL for the publicly running deployed version of this application. And I'm actually going to show it out here. So anybody that wants to can come out here. And I'm going to click Enable Notification right here. And now I'm going to receive push notifications. Anybody else that comes out here can do the same thing. And what I'm going to do is come into messaging in the console and send a test message. And instead of sending a test message, I'm actually going to push this all the way out to everybody. User's target is all users of my application, and I want to send it right now. And I'm going to publish that, and in a minute, we're going to get some notifications. And it's going to pop up as a little toast on here. It does take about 30 seconds to a minute sometimes for the notifications to come through. They get queued up, and then they run through Google's environment whenever we get to that point.
We have a question about iOS. Do they work on iOS?
It's a great question. So does this work on iOS? So sometimes. Well, it's an honest answer. So this works on desktops, it works on laptops, it works on Android, and the Apple team has committed to making this work on iOS correctly. I can almost guarantee you that Firebase Cloud Messaging will work before any other technique works for push notifications for PWAs. I have tested this as working numerous times. I have also received numerous reports from users that it does not work. I have the sneaking suspicion that is strictly based upon the specific iOS device you have and the specific browser version you have and the specific system version you have. It will get better. It will start working. So you do want to be very careful not to enable this for iOS devices if it's not going to work. So generally speaking, you're not going to have a problem, because if they don't ever click that enable button, everything's going to be fine. As soon as they click that enable button, you're going to want to do some error handling that if that crashes, right, if it throws errors when it tries to fetch the permission, you want to make sure to handle that so that you don't continually throw errors. Because what will happen is if they go through that process and you don't handle that error state, every time they try to load that page again in the future, FCM is going to say, hey, they gave me permission here, I'm going to try to run messaging stuff, and it's not going to work, which is unfortunate. Again, it's getting better. We're going to see more and more devices able to use that for iOS in the future. This is super cool, though, for desktop, for Android, and it will work across the board very, very soon. So that was the subscription. Registration. So this is where we're going to add users to topics. So the way I'm handling that in the code is through a cloud function that runs in response to the creation of a chat. So we have a functions folder here, and I've actually stubbed out the function, and I'm going to show you how that works. So on update user subscribe. So what we're doing is we're watching the users collection in the database, and when a change happens, we're going to do some work. So we're going to grab the user record that exists currently, and we're going to grab the user record that is coming in, the change, and we can compare those two things. Basically, what we're looking to see is, are we adding a notification that didn't previously, a notification token that didn't previously exist? If so, we're going to use FCM messaging to subscribe that user to a topic. And the topic in our case is just chats. If they're removing a token, in other words, they had a token before and now we're removing that from them, then we're going to unsubscribe them from that topic. And that's it. It's that simple. So anytime somebody writes to their user profile, which is the way we're recording that notification token, we're going to use this code to subscribe and unsubscribe them from the topics. And so this is using the Firebase admin SDK. We can't do that from the client for security reasons. We have to do this from a server environment. It doesn't have to be a Firebase Cloud function. It can be from a .NET backend. It can be from a Node backend somewhere else. But it does have to be a backend service that actually performs that subscription and unsubscription. The next thing that we have to do is be able to show notifications that happen. There's two ways we're going to do this. The in-app notifications are going to be shown in the app component, and then we're going to have a service worker. The service worker is how we're able to process events that happen when the app is not running, because the service worker will still be there. So in the app component, we are going to uncomment this code right here. So basically, when the application runs, we're going to go ahead and subscribe to FCM messages. Generally, that's going to be empty. But every single time a new message gets added, it's going to trigger this observable. It's going to pass us a message. The structure of the message is such that message notification body is where our text is going to be displayed, the text that we want to display. And we're just using a material snack bar to show that on the page. In fact, let's see. It never did pop up for me over here. That's fun. Okay, so this is where it's just gonna pop the snack bar up. It's gonna pop it up right up in this corner when we receive a message while the application is running. If the application is not running, we should get things in our system notification tray down here. That happens through this service worker. This service worker is pure magic. It has to be named firebase-messaging-sw.js. Any other file name won't work. You also have to make sure that this file gets deployed. So you may be familiar with this already, but inside of your Angular JSON file, in your assets, you need to make sure that that file is listed here so that it will get included as part of your Angular build process, because that has to be part of your deploy. This file does not get auto-generated. You have to create this file. You create a file with this name, and any time the device is registered with Firebase Cloud Messaging, it will automatically load this service worker at that time upon demand in order to be able to handle the messaging. The other thing here is, in order to be able to interact with Firebase, we have to import scripts. This is another thing that is kind of hard to find in the documentation, and we're utilizing automatic initialization. So you remember for the Angular project, we had to import the configuration and create a configuration file. This service worker won't have access to that configuration file because that configuration file only exists at build time. It doesn't exist at runtime. In order to get the runtime configuration, we're using a magic URL here, and this works because we are running in the context of a Firebase hosting. So remember locally, I said I'm running Firebase serve instead of Angular serve. Because I'm running Firebase serve, Firebase knows what project I'm running in and what configuration values it needs, and it interprets this URL and pulls down the correct configuration values for me. It does the same thing when I'm deployed in a Firebase environment. It does the same thing when I'm running in emulators. And in this case, I always do this check. This is really important. Is Firebase messaging supported on this device? The iOS question, this is going to be the thing that's going to save you. If it is supported, then I'm going to subscribe to background messages. In other words, if I receive background messages, because my app is not currently handling them. I want to handle those messages. And here I just simply break down the structure of the message. I've got a title, a body, and image. And then I'm going to do a show notification. Show notification is available through the service workers. This is part of the service worker API. I'm going to show that notification with this context. I've got a default icon if an image wasn't provided, and then the title and the body. So notifications can include an image, they can include a link. I'm not including a link in this right now, but it totally can include a link. That's pretty typical, right? Because we want that push notification. If it's in the background, we want them to be able to tap that to launch our application. We can do that by including a link to the application itself, or even to a specific URL inside of our application, and it'll take them straight to that point to show them the piece of data that we're sending them the notification about. We can also add additional data into that notification that can be used kind of as a clue to our application, so we have additional context. Note that if we're sending multiple messages at the same time, FCM does not guarantee the order of delivery. So we can never use push notifications for something that's sequential, where the sequence matters. One thing that you do need to do, and I'm not showing this in this demo, but it's something that in a production system you should probably handle, is removing stale tokens. In other words, make sure that if you're not able to send to a device because the token, they're no longer receiving push notifications, that you remove that token from your backend system. The other thing you're going to notice when we do this is that because we're sending to a topic, the person that typed the chat is also going to receive a notification for the own chat message that they entered. This is for the sake of simplicity, but in your situation, you would want to edit the service worker and any place you're displaying message to say, hey, was I the person that originated this message? If so, maybe don't show me a notification for my own stuff. And you can easily do that by adding the person's ID as part of the message additional details.
We have a question. How useful have you found the Firebase Device Lab for testing PWA?
Device Lab for testing PWAs. That is an excellent question. I have not used the Device Lab, and the reason is in order for it to be particularly useful, you will really need to have excellent automated tests set up for your project. We are in the process of kind of getting towards that point. We do a lot of manual testing, we have a lot of unit testing, but you need a full suite of automated UI tests for the testing lab to be really effective. Oops, too far. So the last piece here is that we actually need to send the notifications. And once again, that is back in the, I'm going to browse to it. It's in the Firebase functions. We've got a second function. That is on create chat notify. So what we're subscribing to is anytime a chat gets created, we're going to do something, which is we're going to send a push notification. And I'm going to uncomment this. And so we're going to receive this chat object as part of that creation. And then we're going to use the admin SDK to send a message. The topic has to match the topic people are subscribing to. That's why I use a variable here. It's just chats. Then we create a notification. The title is whatever we want. The body is our context. And this is where we would add additional data, including a link, FCM options link. This is the structure for it. Again, I'm not doing it here for the demo, but I left it in here so you can see how links get created. Once all this is done, we have this going on. So if you're in this application, theoretically, there it is. You see, I got a notification from my own thing. So if you come in here and enable notifications, and again, this is the URL for this demo. If you enable notifications and type, we're going to start getting each other's notifications for each other's messages. So I would encourage you to come in here and give that a test really quickly. And another thing, because I know that we had some problems kind of following along and getting through every single step, because this is a lot of things we're throwing at you, and we had some Wi-Fi issues. Inside of the project that you downloaded, you grabbed the main branch. That's where you started. The main branch was just the starter project. If you look, you'll notice that there is a completed branch. The completed branch has the fully functional, completed working version of the final project. The only piece that's missing from that is your own Firebase config file, which hopefully you were able to get through. If not, again, the link to these slides was posted into the Q&A chat, so please be sure to grab that, and you'll be able to go through that later as well. Excellent. Notify this. And now I'm going to really quickly, oh, I didn't get it fast enough. Okay, I'm going to minimize. Actually, I'm going to switch to a different tab. If somebody else wants to go ahead and send a message really quickly, hopefully it'll show up here in my system tray. Maybe. Sometimes it's a little finicky as to what it considers background or not. So in the dev tools, one of the things that's really important, remember earlier we had the service worker for the NGSW service worker for the PWA. Now we also have the Firebase messaging service worker because I subscribed to receiving events. Nope. All right, it's not going to show me the behind the scenes ones. Again, it's a little, because I don't want to close all my windows in order to force the issue. Try it one more time. I'm going to minimize the browser. And sometimes it's just a little bit sluggish as well. I'll do one new push campaign from here as well. And again, it can take up to 30 seconds to send these messages all the way through. Yeah, the curse of the demo gods. That's fine. Anyway, you disable notifications, and now I won't get the notifications anymore, so because I have unsubscribed. And that is how that works. So we've made it through the end. Yes, right there. Boom, because I enabled it again. Okay, so threw a lot of stuff at you. There's a lot of information about the PWA, about the FCM, about the Firebase, so I know threw a lot at you. Any final questions? We have just a couple minutes before we have to wrap up. Happy to address any other questions you may have.
Let me find them.
Awesome. Well, please, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. Those are our Twitter handles. Feel free to ping us at any point to ask any questions you may have. If you would like to schedule a meeting and have another follow-up conversation, that QR code or that link up there will get you to schedule a meeting. If you want to just have a one-on-one and talk this stuff over, happy to do that as well. Thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.